of today's session with a bang. And I think the theme itself, if we look at it in terms of the essence of leadership, never has there been a greater need than today to look at the fundamentals as far as leadership is concerned. I think it is essential for us to start that with what Professor T.V. Rao was talking about in terms of different leadership styles. Today we have an eminent lineup of various facets, individuals who come with completely divergent background to be speaking to us on leadership styles. Our first speaker, Professor Ashish Nanda. May I request all of you all to welcome him onto the stage, please. Professor Nanda is the director of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Before joining IMA, Professor Nanda was the Robert Bosch Professor of Practice at Harvard Law School for 7 years. Professor Nanda works majorly focusing on leadership and management of professional service organizations. Just in the tea break a minute ago, he was speaking with Shrikant about the need for convergence as far as industry and academia practice is concerned. I think there's a lot we've got to look forward to learn from him today. He's our first speaker. Our second speaker is Vikram Hazra. Please welcome Vikram. Vikram is a program director at the Art of Living. I'm sure many of y'all would not be knowing, Vikram is also an avid, self-trained musician. I asked him this morning, which is the greater passion, lecturing or music? Prompt came the response, music, of course. And then we went on to actually talking about integrating the two, getting onto the lecture circuit and also using music as a tool. Welcome, Vikram. Our third speaker is Mr. Anil Thomas. Please welcome Anil Thomas. Anil is the founder of Mustard Seed Training and Assessment Systems. He specializes in personal mastery, leadership excellence, and team synergy workshops. He's a facilitator, a coach, and a successful entrepreneur. He's considered among the finest talent, especially in the area of experiential learning. I'm sure we're going to gather a lot from Anil's session too. Our last speaker for this morning's session is Brigadier Tiwari. Please welcome Brigadier Tiwari. Brigadier Tiwari has had 33 years of illustrious commissioned service. He's also been awarded the Shaurya Chakra, which is the third highest decoration in India for a specific operation which was against the terrorists. He's currently the Additional Director General for Directorate of Resettlement for the South Zone in Pune. I'm sure this morning's session with these four gentlemen is going to be as memorable as the one that we had before the tea break. With this, may I please request Professor Ashish Nanda to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here. And this is perhaps the third or fourth time I am interacting with CII colleagues and friends. The first time I'm doing so in Ahmedabad. And every time I have gone to a CII conference, I've come away having learned a lot from the question and answers and conversations in the larger room, but also in the small conversations around. So I'm really looking forward both to the discussions in this session, to listening to all these, all my wonderful panel colleagues, but also in the discussion session that follows, and then in brief conversations with you as well, which suggests that I should keep my own remarks brief. I'm here to talk about, I discussed with the CII folks and they said the topic was on leadership, and they wanted divergent perspectives on leadership, which is a very refreshing and nice way of looking at it. Sometimes when you look at the same phenomenon from different perspectives, different facets shine through, and then there is a core in the middle. And so I will be talking about the subject of leadership in a context that I am most familiar with. The area that I have done most of my research and teaching in is professional service organizations, professional organizations. And these are organizations like law firms, consulting firms, investment banks, advertising agencies, academic institutions, medical organizations. But what I'm realizing over time is that, in fact, a lot of what happens in professional service organizations is very much overlapping in terms of drivers with a number of other organizations that would not be called professional service, but would be called human capital intensive organizations. Now, many of you are HR professionals here. You'll understand and appreciate that increasingly in organizations today, across the board, people say one of the most strategic asset is what we call elevator assets, people. And so there are some commonalities, I believe, between what we observe in professional organizations and other industrial and commercial organizations. But I leave that for your judgment. Let me just share some insights we have gleaned in professional organizations, partly based on research, partly based on my experience. And I'll share three observations. The first observation is that leadership in professional organizations, the responsibility of a leader is that of a producer leader. You cannot divorce production from leadership. So one of the oddities when you go to professional organizations and you go to places like, Goldman Sachs. We just had a news item on the CEO of Goldman Sachs this morning, Lloyd Blankfein, 61 years old, and he's CEO of one of the two investment banks left standing after the 2007 financial crisis in the US. It's one of the largest international global investment banks there is. You would imagine Blankfein would spend all his time in managing this organization. Lloyd spends at least 2 hours every day on the trading floor. He still trades on his own account. And then you look to law firms. You go to the most profitable law firm there is, Wachtell Lipton. And last year, their profits were a little bit low by their standards. Per partner profit was only $5.4 million. So It's a very, very successful firm, highly profitable. It's been in #1 in Vault rankings for the last leader of that firm, one of the name partners, Marty Lipton. There was a Wall Street Journal article about 3 years ago celebrating his 80th birthday. Marty Lipton is an institution in corporate law. People call him the Elvis Presley of takeover defense. He introduced things like the poison pill and so on. You go to Marty Lipton and you say, Marty, you are 83 years old. You are an institution on Wall Street. Your firm's doing amazingly. You must have stopped working on individual client transactions. And Marty will laugh at you. He still works with clients. You go to McKinsey and you ask them, McKinsey, one of the top management consulting firms, you ask them how many of your directors, equivalent of partners, there's about 850 directors worldwide. How many of your directors have pure management responsibility, not client responsibilities? Now, McKinsey teaches organizations how to manage, so they must have people really focused on management. How many of their 850 directors do you think don't have direct client responsibility? Take a guess. Partner, who says, by the way, I make sure to spend at least 1/3 of my time out with clients. I have just come having taught a class at IIM Ahmedabad. Okay? As they're teaching a class. So this is a very interesting phenomenon you see in professional organizations. And actually, I think the more human capital intensive even non-professional organizations are, the more true it is of them. People who are in leadership positions continue to be actively engaged in production. And upon looking at this in depth, we've found there are perhaps 4 reasons for it. One reason is that people who have reached leadership positions in these organizations have done so, not just because they are very good managers, but because they are really, really good at production. Typically, only a top-notch strategic consultant will become the head of McKinsey. Typically, only a top-notch trader or a top-notch investment banker will become head of Goldman Sachs. Typically, only a top-notch lawyer will become a head of a law firm. So you reach senior levels not only because you are very, very good in management, but also very... So last year, I taught a second-year course with somebody, my colleague of mine. Wanted to see what was happening in the class, what were the dynamics. The experience I had teaching students in that term, I think at an experiential level, you cannot match it just by getting reports. And so very often people are in production actually to keep, so to say, a finger on the pulse of what's happening. The third part, why people continue to produce, is that very often clients, market, customers demand it. They say, I don't care if you become a very senior person in your organization. I, need your attention. It's not just the product I'm buying, it's the trust that you are representing the product. So clients demand it. But the fourth most critical reason, particularly in professional organizations, and I think increasingly in human capital intensive organizations, is that you get credibility with your colleagues if you are a producer. If you don't produce, if all you are is a manager, particularly in professional organizations, you can see it in the eyes of your colleagues. Sometimes they say it straight to your face. What is it? They call you overhead. That's one of the kinder terms that I can tell you just now. Out of touch, overhead. I've advised a number of law firms. Law firms have people who get to be managing partners. Some of these law firms have term limits. I've had at least 4 conversations personally with law firm leaders, roughly in their 6th year, let's say each term is 4 years, who'll say, Ashish, I was elected the managing partner of my law firm, and I made the biggest mistake of my career, which is I stopped doing production. My partners actually delegated all the leadership responsibilities to me, all the management responsibilities to me. I was amazed how much management there was to be done. I wanted to do a good job of it. I wanted to be fair to my clients. So I personally handed over the client relationships to my partners. And do you know what those same partners are calling me 6 years later? Overhead, dead wood. Ashish, it would have been so much better had I continued doing some production. I may not have been excellent as a manager, but at least I would have the credibility of my partners. So people continue producing because it gives them credibility with their colleagues. And so for all these reasons, one of the dramatic things that we are finding in professional service firms is high-performing professional service firms at leadership level do not specialize between management and production, which is perhaps at helicopter level, which is making sure that different parts of the organization are all roughly moving in the same direction, that they are not scattering in different directions, they are aligned in their movement. And the third one is implementation, which is at ground level. And you are trying to make sure that you are actually moving with people as you are making progress. So a leader has to be working at 3 levels, 50,000 feet, helicopter level, ground level. And if you focus too much on one to the exception of the others, the organization suffers. And in fact, if one person has strength in one area, as you think of a leadership team, the complementary person should have strength in the other. So you should be yin and yang in your leadership, cover these 3 levels together. I'm happy to expand on it later, but I want to keep these comments tight. The third thing I want to just suggest is there are many different ways to exercise leadership. You can have a strategic perspective. You can have a vision statement. You can use organization structure to implement your sense of direction where you want to go to. You can have incentive systems. They are all tools to actually effect leadership. The most powerful instrument you have, however, in professional organizations is yourself. What you do as a leader has 2 consequences. And this is particularly true in professional settings, I know, in human capital intensive settings, I think fairly certainly. What you do as a leader has 2 consequences. One is the small consequence of the direct result of what you are doing. The second is the signal you convey to others about where you stand. In other words, deeds speak much louder than words. In other words, how you conduct yourself is communicating far more strongly where you want the organization to go, how committed you are, whether you are focused on implementation, than any statement or any directive that you will send. And so the way you present, the way you interact, the way you take decisions really determines to a significant extent the impact you have on people. Let me just pause here, and if there are questions, I'll just take them at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Morning, friends. I'm here representing the wing of the art of living called APEX, Achieving Personal Excellence. Not many of you may be aware that for the longest time, we have had a separate autonomous wing that conducts corporate leadership programs on a global level. And we interact with industry and formulate modules to train management at specific levels based on the needs of the organizations we deal with. At the outset, I'd like to say, to paraphrase a hoary old saying, that some people are born to lead, some achieve positions of leadership, and yet others have leadership thrust upon them. I fall in the third category. As Bomi said earlier, I'd much rather be sitting alone playing my guitar or be up in the mountains somewhere. We were doing a particular rural and community development project. And I think that's when the first, I think the correct word is ehsas of leadership came to me. When I was training this guy to become a, it's like a training program to empower rural youth to become, these are the so-called educated, unemployed rural youth of our country. And what we were doing was training them to become change agents within the community. One of them at the end of the program said, okay, fine, I'm inspired to work, I'm inspired to dedicate 2 years of my life to work in my own community, and then I want to grow and seek further education, get a professional qualification, vocational, whatever it may be, and stand on my own 2 feet. But when I go out to work, I face very real threats. This is the time when insurgency was at its peak in the Northeast. My mother to this day thinks I used to go there to sing bhajans. But it has been, I would say, an eye-opener for me. I've met almost every top terrorist leader in the Northeast in the course of those 10 years. And you'll be surprised. One of them, I would meet them in very informal settings. I'd tell them, "Main aapke ghar pe aa jata hu." And he takes me into his room. His bookcase has everybody from Nietzsche to Sartre to you name it, all the top philosophers of the world were there. Such a highly educated man. To kick off the conversation, we talked about fishing in the local river. And the insights I got into these people, you cannot imagine. You cannot imagine the kind of life that they live. But these kids that I was training, one of them says to me, it's a very real scenario in my life that I go there to teach the lessons that you taught me to other people, health, hygiene, education, whatever, sanitation. The next day, my family gets assassinated. Who takes responsibility for my life? And for a moment, I think that was the crossover point for me between theory and technique and application. Because I looked at him and I realized that at that point of time, I couldn't tell him ki kripa sab sambhal legi. I had to look him in the eye and tell him, I take responsibility for your life. I don't think even I knew what I was saying at that point of time. But his reaction was that, okay, if you are doing this, then I don't mind giving up my life tomorrow in the service of my community, my state, my area for development purposes. For me, it became an issue of great responsibility. I would like to narrow it down to 2 simple things that I would touch upon today, and then let's see if we can take it further. Please don't misconstrue this as a sweeping generalization when I say that today the leadership of the world has let us down, leading to a huge crisis, a huge vacuum at every level. This is one observation. My second observation, which I'll touch upon in a bit, is that the essence of leadership comes down to 4 words. I do not know. Now, what this mystery is, let's see if we can touch upon. But to get back to the first point, let's take the example of a guy living in a village in India. He decides, let's look at his life. For several generations, everything he ate could be thrown out just outside his hut. Because nothing had pesticides, everything was biodegradable. It would all mix with the soil. He would go and do his business in the field early in the morning. Even that wouldn't cause any harm to anybody. Today, He continues to do the exact same thing, but what he's throwing out is not pattal, is not kullad, is not rice, but he's throwing out chips packets. He's throwing out styrofoam cups. And he's throwing them in the exact same place, and it's creating this huge mess over there. People have built toilets. I was also involved in building toilets for a time. And I was told that this whole scheme of providing toilets to villages is not working properly. So my bright idea was to go and use one and see why it doesn't work. So we got there. We couldn't reach the toilet because what people had done was they had defecated all around it. Because people had built them toilets or sold them toilets for 400 rupees and told them that's the area where you do your business. Nobody had told them that you are supposed to go in, squat on it, and pour water. This is why I'm talking about a crisis in leadership. If my view is to take the population of a nation or a society from one point to a certain level, am I equipping them with the tools? Am I equipping them with the